Fantasy football is so easy when you're able to predict which running backs are going to make the jump from RB2s to RB1s in a given year. So in this video, I've projected out all my running backs and I'm giving you the top 24. First up at number 24 is Rhamondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. Heading into the offseason, we didn't know what kind of workload he would be getting. Antonio Gibson joins the fray and the Patriots hadn't yet given him a contract, but now he has one. So even though in previous years he's been used as a big receiving back, I think that's mainly going to be Gibson's role now, and Rhamondre's going to have a career year in terms of attempts per game. I have him at 240 overall attempts, 44 receptions, and about 6 total touchdowns. But without Drake May starting right away, this offense should not be any good. It's really going to be projected the lowest in the league on a per game basis. So even though 11.9 points per game is pretty low, he only had 12.1 last year, and with less receptions, I think it's fair. Then we get to number 23, Zack Moss, who I think has a ton of upside if anything happens to Chase Brown, or if Chase Brown doesn't have the big role we think he does. The way I think of this backfield is Zack Moss gets the goal line work, a lot of the short yardage situations, kind of like a David Montgomery on steroids. And Chase Brown should have a lot of the receiving work. He's very efficient in that aspect, very athletic, but if anything happens or he's not as good as we think he is, Zack Moss could have a bell cow workload. Right now I got him at 8 total touchdowns, just over 1,000 rushing yards, 14.1 attempts per game, seems pretty fair, 12.4 points per game overall. Then we get to our RB22, Najee Harris. I know a lot of you hate Arthur Smith for what he did to Bijan Robinson, but he's been a really good run game coordinator in previous jobs. When he was the OC for the Titans, that's when Derrick Henry had his monster 2,000-yard season. He's not meant to be a head coach, but he sure knows how to design a run game. So you'll see I have Najee at 15.4 rushing attempts per game. His reception numbers are pretty low, only at 35, because Jalen Warren is that guy in the passing game. I have him at 7.5 rushing touchdowns. In his 3 years, he's had 7, 7, and 8. And I actually gave him a boost in efficiency to 4.4 yards per carry. This offensive line has gotten a lot better, and I think that he's going to improve upon that. But you see his yards per reception at 5.9. Yeah, he's not the most athletic dude. I hear he's dropping 15 or so pounds of weight. That should be good for getting a little bit more burst and efficiency. And as I said before, there's a ton of contingent upside where he could average like 15, 16 points per game if anything does happen to Warren. And this is a trend we see with a lot of running backs. Our RB21 is David Montgomery. Obviously, if anything happens to Jahmyr Gibbs, he's probably like top 10, top 12 easily. I have him rushing for nearly 1,200 yards and 11.5 rushing touchdowns. He should be fairly efficient again behind this great O-line, 4.6 yards per carry and about 15 carries a game. Last year, he got more of the rushing work than Jahmyr Gibbs. I still expect that to stay the same barely. I have him at 2 more carries per game, but he's getting a lot less receptions. But on a great offense that gave him a ton of goal line work last year, I expect a lot of that again. Then we get to a tricky one at Kenneth Walker, RB20 at 13 points per game. This offense is completely changing and it's going to be extremely pass heavy, so I don't see him getting too many attempts per game, only at 14.3. And while he should see more receptions in this type of offense, Zach Charbonnet is the better pass blocker and better pass catcher, so I think he'll just be on the field a lot more than he was last year. But on the goal line, that's still Kenneth Walker's job. I have him scoring 9 total touchdowns this season. At this point, we really know how Kenneth Walker is. He'll have a couple breakaway runs here and there, but for the most part, he'll be pretty inefficient. His success rate year in, year out is always pretty bad. And speaking of bad success rate, our RB19 Rachaad White, my goodness, his advanced metrics are horrible. But I've already talked about that enough in previous videos. I got him about 1,200 total yards, 7.5 touchdowns, 13.5 points per game. But you'll see what's really holding him back, 3.8 yards per carry and 6.8 yards per reception. Those are both very low for a running back. Personally, I don't think he's very skilled, but it doesn't help that his offensive line and system just isn't very good. They will have a new offensive coordinator, but I don't think he'll be better than Dave Canales, so I'm not really looking for much there. They did also draft Bucky Irving, so I think he'll catch a lot of passes. I still give Rachaad White 53 catches, but that was like the main attraction for him last year to push 60 or 70 receptions. I don't see that happening. Then we go to RB18, James Cook at 13.6 points per game. We know he's going to be pretty efficient, 8.3 yards per reception. That's amazing. 4.5 yards per carry. That's pretty good, but it all comes down to touchdowns. I have him catching 3 touchdowns and rushing for 4. That's just straight up not going to be good enough. Josh Allen had 15 rushing touchdowns last year. He's still going to be used heavily on the goal line, and they draft a running back who's an absolute bowling ball. Ray Davis is 5'8", 220 pounds. He's only going to be used on 3rd and 1s, 4th and 1s, and on the goal line. So while James Cook is going to catch 46 balls, almost have 400 receiving yards, I just don't see it without the touchdowns really coming together. He'll have some big weeks here and there when he does score those touchdowns, but outside of that, he'll be very inconsistent. And while I have Cook above guys like Montgomery and Najee Harris, both of them, even Zack Moss, have more upside overall if the other back in the backfield gets hurt. There's pretty much no scenario where James Cook averages like 16 points per game. There's just no possible way. Now we're on to RB17, and I'm a little disappointed in Joe Mixon at 13.9 points per game. I thought it would be better, but his efficiency is just going to be pretty bad still. I actually gave him a boost in yards per carry since he left Cincinnati. It's at 4.1 now. He was well under 4 for a couple years now. The Texans have a better O-line, and they have 3 receivers that are going to keep the boxes pretty light for Joe Mixon, but he's still not that talented. He's living off of name value at this point. I still have him almost getting 15 attempts per game, a good amount of receptions because he does get checkdowns pretty often, and just about 10 touchdowns total on the season. The way he would break fantasy football is if he ended up with like 15 touchdowns because the offense got unlucky and fell down a bunch at the 1-yard line. That's how I could see it happening. And speaking of breaking fantasy, our RB16 Raheem Mostert at 14.6 points per game sure did that last season. He was averaging over 17 points a game when he was healthy. I'm not going to quite go that far this year, but I still think he gets 13.6 attempts per game at 29 total receptions. Nothing crazy. But as you can see, 14.5 total touchdowns, almost 5 yards a carry, and nearly 7 yards per reception. He's going to be efficient. Devon Achane is just too small to get the goal line work away from Mostert. Mostert had 16 goal line carries last year. Achane only had 2, and they both missed a good amount of time, so that's going to be higher for both of them this year. I think this backfield is pretty injury prone, so it's going to be like a 50-50 split. I don't think the coaches will take a chance giving one of these guys 70% of the touches. It doesn't really make sense. But the next guy should be getting 70% of touches. That's Aaron Jones at RB15, averaging almost 15 points per game. We know he's been very efficient throughout his entire career as a Packer. I gave him 4.7 yards per carry, a little bit less than his career average of 5. And that's just because the Vikings O-line is not quite as good in run blocking. But I still think he's used heavily in the receiving game. 51 receptions, JJ McCarthy, Sam Darnold, they want to give him easy checkdowns, and Ty Chandler isn't quite the pass catcher that Aaron Jones is. And not to mention, he finally gets the goal line work after years of A.J. Dillon stealing all of that. I have him at 8.5 total touchdowns, and honestly, that feels like I'm shooting low there. If the Vikings do decide that he's the goal line back, I could see him getting 10 plus pretty easily. Now, the RB14 Alvin Kamara at 15.1 points per game just projects so well every single time. I was trying to lower his stuff because I just don't see with the Saints O-line. They're 31st ranked. Derek Carr's bad. The offense can be horrible. But the problem is, if he's catching almost 6 balls a game like he did last year, he's going to score a ton of fantasy points. If he didn't get suspended for 4 games at the start of the season, he would have set a career high in receptions last year. But I have to imagine they're going to try to work on the other running backs a little bit more this year, so I still have him at 78 receptions. Very, very respectable stuff. But that's more about 4.7 to 4.8 catches a game. Still a ton, but not quite the almost 6 he was seeing last year. And as you can see behind that, I don't have a crazy amount of carries per game, 13.2, and I still have him being very inefficient at 3.9 yards per carry. And I have him projected overall at 6.75 touchdowns. That has plenty of room to grow if the Saints offense outperforms what I think they will, but it's just looking really bad, and the O-line is not great, so this is pretty fair. And then our RB13 is Josh Jacobs at 15 points per game. I have him at 46 receptions, 15.4 attempts per game, and 10 total touchdowns. Matt LaFleur is worrying me a little bit, though, saying they're going to go running back by committee, something they have always done with him. You would think the Packers only did that because Aaron Jones was a little injury prone, and Josh Jacobs is more of a bell cow, but Derrick Henry and Deion Lewis split carries under Matt LaFleur like 5 years ago, if you guys remember. So I kind of believe him. Anyways, leave a like, drop a comment on this video, what you want to see next. I think I'll do the first round of fantasy football next. Drop a follow, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.